In today's video, you will hear paranormal things soldiers faced in deployment. If you like my content, do like and subscribe. I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for being here. And now, let's get started. Story 1. This story took place about an hour outside of Haditha, in a small village with roughly 20 homes. We were sent there to track down an IED maker. After cordoning off the village and conducting a search, we finally found him hiding under a stack of floor mats, about 10 of them piled on top of each other. If you've never seen these mats, think of them as super thin, rough mattresses. The locals would spread them out on the floor at night for sleeping and then stack them up during the day. We pulled him out, and as expected, he wasn't too happy. Things escalated quickly as we were trying to wrestle him into the back of the second turn. Out of nowhere, what we believed to be his mother lost it. She started screaming like she was possessed, throwing dirt on her face, ripping her clothes, and pointing at each of us, as if casting some kind of curse. And here's the part that still haunts me. Every single one of us who was there still has nightmares about that woman. The dreams are vivid, feel real, and we all wake up drenched in cold sweat, paralyzed by fear. It's been over 15 years, and none of us have shaken these dreams. I haven't even brought this up with my VA shrink, Brad, yet. Story 2. This happened during my third deployment to Iraq. Our platoon had set up in 2 houses in a village a few miles south of Haditha. One day, I heard our translator getting into a heated discussion with 2 local men. Grabbing my gear and rifle, I headed out to the road to see what was going on. The translator assured me that the men weren't dangerous, but told me they were crazy, superstitious even. I pried a little more, and that's when I heard they were claiming to have a wolfman problem. Apparently, this wolfman had been coming around at night, killing their sheep, and they were terrified it would eventually attack their family. They were hesitant to shoot at it, for fear of alarming the local troops, but the translator was trying to downplay the whole thing. Still, I needed clarity.
Oh, they mean a dog?
I asked, thinking maybe something got lost in translation. The translator hesitated, almost embarrassed, but the men were insistent it wasn't just a dog or a wolf. It was a wolfman. Curious and a little confused, I asked them to describe what they had seen. They claimed that the creature would come around every few nights, starting off on all 4s like an animal, but then it would stand upright, walking on 2 legs like a man. It had lunged at them before, but when they backed off, it turned its attention to their sheep, killing several in brutal fashion. Their dogs refused to engage, as if they were just as terrified. Despite the translator's assurance that it was just superstition, I decided to let them know they had every right to protect themselves. A couple of nights later, while out on patrol, we swung by their house again. The man greeted us and allowed us inside. We set up sentries on the roof to keep an eye on a nearby bridge, but about an hour into our watch, the homeowner came running up, panicked and speaking rapidly. I grabbed 2 other guys, and we followed him into the courtyard where the sheep were kept. The sheep were restless, and the man pointed to a dark corner of the yard. I squinted, trying to see what he was gesturing at. At first, I saw what looked like a large wolf or dog just standing there. I asked the guys with me if they saw it too, and they agreed it was a big wolf or dog. Then we heard a series of strange popping and cracking sounds, like joints or bones shifting. When the creature stepped out from behind a section of the wall, it was standing upright on 2 legs. Before we could react, it effortlessly jumped over the perimeter wall and sprinted off, not on 4 legs, but 2. We could hear it running away in the distance, the sound of its feet echoing in the night. I told the man that if this thing ever showed up again, he should shoot it if he couldn't. If he did, he needed to let us know immediately. Story 3. I've seen a lot during my time in Yokosuka, traveling to different countries and visiting countless historical sites. but nothing compares to what happened at Hacksaw Ridge. It was a place with a dark history, and the atmosphere reflected that. I decided to document my visit, capturing everything: the ravines, the bunkers built into the hillsides, and a small bridge that led into the heart of the site. I took tons of photos and videos, making sure I recorded every inch. Before leaving the site, I replayed everything I captured. It was all there, crystal clear. But something changed by the time I got back to my ship. Every single photo and video was corrupted. The images were distorted, fractured beyond recognition. The videos were no better, frozen in blurry frames where everything was out of focus. What's even stranger is that the audio was completely fine. You could hear me narrating the whole time, talking about what I was seeing, but the visuals were gone. It's like the place didn't want to be remembered. Out of all the places I visited during my 6 years in Yokozuka, this was the only time something like this happened. Looking back, I wonder if I was meant to leave Hacksaw Ridge with nothing more than my own memories. Whatever it was, it made sure nothing from that place followed me home. Story 4. At Cherry Point, there's a story about a ghost haunting the area because they built a runway over a family graveyard. However, I never met anyone who actually saw it. During my army call-up in Germany, there was a community club, formerly a German officers' club, that was also said to be haunted. It had a super cool Rottskiller, but despite being there often for night shifts, I never encountered any ghosts, even though I would check a lot. The first time I was sent to Chocolate Mountain, I saw strange lights in the restricted areas at night and initially thought it might be something paranormal. Turned out it was just the local tweakers. They knew WTI was starting, and we'd be using the Rangers heavily, so they had old trucks with mounted lights to go out and collect scrap metal. They'd sell the metal in Brawley for more meth money. They were out there all day and night, stocking up while they could until we finished. Story 5. I was on fire watch during our land up at the schoolhouse. It was probably around 0100 or so. We had been briefed that if we found any Native American artifacts, we weren't supposed to mention it, or it would shut down the whole field op. So, we students just shrugged it off and forgot about it. Anyway, I get woken up, get dressed at some ungodly hour, and time starts to drag. An hour passes, and me and my buddy are talking, watching cars drive by on the highway, thinking how nice it must be to be in one of those cars right now. Suddenly, we look to our left, and about 50 feet away, we see a deer running, but it's going insanely fast. The thing looked strange. Its antlers were crooked in weird shapes, and its body looked almost mushy, like its bones were all jumbled up. Then, out of nowhere, the deer stands up on its hind legs and starts sprinting across the field toward the mountains, disappearing into the night. Now, I've been running on maybe 2 hours of sleep in the past 2 days, but the moment that thing stood up, I felt this icy cold wave wash over me. My whole body froze, and my hair stood on end. It felt like it had sucked something out of me, and I was hit with the worst sense of impending doom I've ever felt. I turned to my Firewatch buddy and asked if he saw it too, and he confirmed that he did. We both stood there, wide-eyed, trying to make sense of what we just witnessed. Even now, just thinking or talking about it sends chills down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck still rise. I still don't know what it was. Story 6. At the schoolhouse in Fort Sill, I had 2 separate paranormal encounters. For context, the Marine Artillery Detachment barracks were right in front of a cemetery, and the barracks next to ours were abandoned. One night, while on duty, I headed out to the smoke pit, which was located in front of the abandoned barracks. As I looked up at one of the windows, I swear there was an outline of a person standing in the window. I couldn't tell if it was looking down at me or just standing there, since it was pitch dark outside. Either way, I was spooked. I quickly put out my cigarette and got myself back inside. The second incident happened at the same barracks. We weren't allowed into the attic, but some of the guys were living on the floor just below it. Being young and curious, we decided to check it out. We opened the door that led to the stairwell up to the attic, and it was pitch black up there. I snapped a picture, and, at the very top, clear as day, was an apparition. We could make out its shoulders and head. After that, we never opened that door again. I wish I still had that photo as proof, but I swear, I'm not making any of this up. Another weird incident happened in 2010, in the same barracks, but on Deck F. The furthest from the OC, I was on fire watch, covering both the first and second deck. The top deck was empty at the time, with all the doors propped open by bricks. Every time I went up to the second deck, it felt strange, like something was off. I hated going up there. During one of my rounds, as I was walking by one of the doors, it suddenly slammed shut, like someone had forcefully thrown it closed. The windows weren't open, and the door had been propped with a brick, so there was no draft to blame. That freaked me out. I told whatever was there out loud that I was leaving, and didn't look back. A couple of nights later, a new guy who had just arrived came to us at 0200, wide-eyed, saying he had just seen a lady in a white gown in the hallway. I believed every word. That place is seriously weird. Story 7. There was an airman in the dorms, at an unknown base. He was a good airman with no issues. Hispanic, and very religious, a demographic that takes ghosts and spirits seriously. Apparently, this airman began showing up to work late, appearing messy, out of regulations, and performing poorly over the course of a few weeks. He had a solid track record, so his supervisors initially gave him the benefit of the doubt. However, his behavior continued to deteriorate, leading them to confront him about it. He said nothing and simply sat there as they spoke. As time went on, his issues escalated, resulting in trouble at work, receiving letters of counseling locks, getting chewed out, and the usual reprimands. Despite this, his behavior did not improve. Eventually, they encouraged him to seek mental health support. He complied, and it turned out that he genuinely believed his dorm room was haunted. The mental health clinic didn't think he was lying. The airmen truly believed there was a ghost in his room. However, they also recognized that there was likely a mental health issue at play. Eventually, they had to separate him from the dorm due to his psychosis and poor work performance. He was a good airman, and they didn't want to take that step, but it was necessary. When the shirt, a superior, arrived at the dorm to help the airman move out, he entered the closet to gather the airman's belongings. As he looked up at the ceiling, he spotted a face staring back at him through a vent. The shirt was completely taken aback. It turned out that another airman who had gone AWOL was living in the walls of the dorm building, and would use this airman's room to go to the bathroom, stretch out, or whatever else he needed. So, while airman number 1 lay in bed, he would literally hear someone crawl out of the wall, come out of his closet, and casually walk into his bathroom before retreating back into the wall. It's no wonder he thought his dorm was haunted, especially given his background. In the end, airman number 2, the ghost, was removed from the base, and airman number 1's mental health improved. He was able to stay in the Air Force. A happy ending. Story 8. At Warehouse 1 on Kadena, back when I was on swing shift a few months ago, I was heading to the pilferage cage with another airman from my shop to put away some knives and other equipment. Since swing shift was slow and we had a lot of bulky items, we decided to just drop them off in the pilferage cage, go to lunch, and sign everything in when we returned. As we approached the door, we heard scurrying footsteps behind us, coming from the corner of the warehouse near where TMO inbound usually works. We both looked back, staring into the darkness as we tracked the footsteps until they finally stopped. Keep in mind that our warehouse has motion sensor lights, and nothing turned on. You can bet we hurried back to the office and didn't set foot in the warehouse again unless absolutely necessary. Earlier that night, our NCOIC and one of our NCOs, Filipino and Samoan, respectively, had been sharing ghost stories from back home. The NCOIC mentioned hearing some strange sucking and slurping noises coming from somewhere in the office, but couldn't pinpoint the source. Coupled with another airman hearing a shriek in the warehouse. We spent the rest of that week traveling in pairs whenever we had to be in that place. Story 9. Here's my Kadena story. I was hanging out with a few local girls who were very superstitious and into all sorts of things like ghosts, curses, feng shui, and burning sage. We started talking about how my dorm room bed was positioned ideally, hey there. But I mentioned that I usually slept on my love seat, which was perpendicular to my bed. They pointed out that this wasn't an ideal setup compared to my bed, but I brushed it off. Having grown up Catholic, I didn't think much of it. Later that night, or shortly after, I remember falling asleep in my love seat and suddenly feeling a strong sense that someone was watching me, standing over me. It was that familiar feeling you get when you know someone is looking at you while you're stopped at a traffic light, or when someone is behind you trying to surprise you. My room was pitch black, and I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling. I was genuinely scared, so I decided the best course of action was to clench my eyes shut as tightly as possible. That didn't help, so I finally opened my eyes to look in the direction where I felt the presence. I swear, as clear as I'm typing this out 14 years later, there was a white face in the corner of my dorm room, looking down at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin and immediately went back to squeezing my eyes shut. I waited a few minutes with a blanket over my head, screw that, then finally decided to walk over to the light switch, keeping my eyes closed the whole way. I flipped the switch and, thankfully, saw nothing. I think I stayed up the rest of the night with the lights on, just messing around on my laptop and playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on the PS3. Since it was nighttime, the terrible internet bandwidth was at least tolerable. All these years later, and this remains the most frightened I've ever felt in my life. It ranks right up there with the time I saw a man floating on the freeway, but that's a story for another day. Story 10. I was stationed at Ramstein and lived in a small village about 15 minutes north of the base. One night, I went out to dinner in a nearby village. On the way back, as we drove along a winding German farm road, we came around a corner, and the headlights of the car illuminated a man standing there. He was facing away from the road, wearing tall leather boots, along with a dark grey coat and pants. All of us in the car were like, what the heck? When we turned around to look again, he had vanished. The next day, I was chatting with my neighbor and a little old German lady down the street, and I told them about the strange encounter. The little old German lady turned pale and described the spot where we had seen the figure to a T. It turns out that right at that location, an American plane had strafed a truck carrying German soldiers just days before the area was overrun by Allied forces. Many people over the years had reported seeing this young German soldier wandering around that area. Story 11. I was stationed at Fort Jackson during basic training, and we were the last class to go through these barracks before they were torn down. The buildings were made of corrugated sheet metal, and demolition had already started on one of the other buildings. I'm not kidding when I say these places were built before the Vietnam War. One night, my partner and I were on fire watch. One of us had to sit at the desk while the other walked around to clean something. I was at the desk, trying really hard not to fall asleep, when I heard someone muttering in their sleep. It wasn't unusual, but this guy was being a lot louder than others I'd heard. I walked over to see if I could make out what he was saying, since I had nothing better to do. He kept talking under his breath, but I couldn't understand him. Eventually, my partner joined me, and we both stood there for a moment. Suddenly, this guy bolted upright, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Do you see them? They're coming." Then, just like that, he fell back down and started snoring. We exchanged terrified glances and didn't say a word about it. It was a weird occurrence, but not exactly ghost-worthy. That was until the next morning. When we woke up, everyone in the bay realized that all the beds had been pushed 2 inches away from the walls. Every single one. To this day, I can't explain that part. I've seen some strange things, but that is one occurrence I can't even come up with a good explanation for. Story 12. AWACSR Haunted. One particular evening, late on a Friday, my buddy and I kept hearing footsteps running up and down the main cabin above us. It started as just one set of footsteps, and we didn't think much of it, since it could have been someone working. But when we went up through the mid-fuselage hatch, we paused because it sounded like they were close, and we didn't want to trip them up. After the footsteps passed, we opened the hatch to find a dark aircraft with no one in the main cabin. The footsteps faded quickly, leaving us pretty freaked out, but we continued on with our work. As the night went on, the single set of footsteps turned into many, sounding like a crowd running frantically above us. That was it. We got out of there and called it a night. We always joked that it was because of the recycled parts from the Yulka 27 crash in '95, which were haunted by the lost souls on board. Rest in peace to them, but you won't catch me outside, late at night, and alone on that aircraft again. Story 13. I'm not sure if anyone else can agree, but Incirlik Air Base in Turkey has a certain spiritual darkness about it. During COVID, while I was in quarantine at the base hotel, I had a disturbing experience with a very negative presence. At times, the room would smell of methane, but there was no discernible source. Then, nearly 3 days before I was released, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling cold. As I got up to grab the blanket I had set on the chair next to the bed, I suddenly felt a malicious stare, as if someone was watching me from the corner of the room, preparing to charge like a linebacker. It was so intense that I couldn't turn away. My eyes were locked with an unseen entity. On the day I was released, I came down with the worst cold I had ever experienced before COVID. There were more strange occurrences while I was there, but this one was by far the most intense. I also had an unsettling experience at Hill Air Force Base's hotel during my stay in a suite. One evening, the gas stove turned itself on, clicking and switching to medium dist. Despite me being nowhere near it, and never having touched it during my entire stay, several times throughout the night, I caught glimpses of darting shadows out of the corners of my eyes. Additionally, I often dreamed of fighting off a pale, golem-like creature that was trying to get into the bedroom. Story 14. Another Kadena story. A lot of the base housing is built on old burial grounds and ancient tombs that were cleared out before the homes were constructed. Take Marrick Park, where I lived, for example. A few years back, before they began a major refurbishment project for the neighborhood, crews went around checking areas for things like graves. They dug a few feet into my front yard and sectioned it off, after they discovered a yellow-colored object with red writing on it. The lead guy was on his phone for quite a while, and by the end of the day, they covered it back up. I'm not sure what it was, but after that incident, I experienced more instances of sleep paralysis than I ever had in my life while living there. Story 15. At the passenger terminal in Yogyakarta, I was opening for an early spacer flight at 3 a.m. with my supervisor and another airman. I was tasked with turning on the lights and the TVs that broadcast information throughout the terminal. I had just reached the inbound passenger side, which was still dark except for the backup lights. To turn on the lights, I needed to walk across the room to get to the breaker box. As I was making my way, I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps running up behind me. I turned, expecting it to be my supervisor or the other airman coming to let me know something important, but there was no one behind me. I switched on the lights from the breaker and headed back to dispatch, where I found both my supervisor and the other airman discussing work. On another occasion, while working nights at the terminal, I was in the process of shutting down and locking up the building. We had to check the bathrooms to ensure no passengers were hiding. Some tried to stay overnight for a free place to sleep. When I walked into the female bathroom, I saw a solid black humanoid shape in one of the stalls, reflected in the mirror. I quickly turned around to look at the stall, but there was nothing there. Looking back at the mirror, the black form had vanished. I didn't stick around to check the rest of the stalls. While working nights, we often heard phantom footsteps and doors flying open, creating a general sense of unease in the terminal. We wished we could explain the noises, but even with the terminal locked up tight and all of us in the same room, we would swear we heard someone running or walking down the halls. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe, and let me know below of your thoughts. If you want to help in my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.